Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, and we're going to take a little break from all the Warden and the Paunch news and updates to go back to some other stuff that we had going on here in the channel. And by that, of course, I mean the Heroes of Legend. So last time, we left off with the Dwarves of the Mountains. Hopefully you guys really enjoyed that. I will go ahead and confess in this video that personally, I would really like Joseph Bugman to be the hero if they ever did this DLC concept, because I would actually much prefer that the Master Engineer character be a Legendary Lord instead, and kind of have a whole army built around that idea. Plus, Bugman having an army just rubs me the wrong way. He always shows up heroically leading his rangers into the flank of an enemy. Even in the end times, he only showed up with his personal unit, and that was it. Ungrim was the one that brought the army, but I digress. Let's go ahead and move on to the next faction in alphabetical order from the original first game of Total War Warhammer, which means that the Empire is next. So, who will we be looking at to represent the noble heart of mankind at the center of the old world? Why don't we go ahead and get into it? One of the only men in the Empire worthy of being the first Hero of Legend DLC candidate would be the Emperor's champion, Ludwig Schwartzel. It is difficult to put into words how much of an absurd badass that Ludwig is, despite being just a man, with no crazy magical shenanigans or faith powers or whatever. He is an absolute giant of muscle, who has a damn mean case of old man strength. The Emperor's Champion is responsible for a truly staggering number of roles when fulfilling his duties to the Emperor. Most commonly, he acts as the voice and acting arm of Karl Franz, being the one who will journey out across the Empire and even further afield to deal with problematic political concerns and bring those nobles who forget their place back into line. Furthermore, Schwarzhelm acts as the judicial champion for Franz, hence his title. Thus he is the Emperor's justice made manifest when dealing with those who would challenge for trial by combat. Ludwig then bears the Emperor's standard when taking to the field of battle, raising the magical banner high to rally the men of the Empire to stand their ground against any foe, no matter how terrifying or sinister. Finally, the Emperor's champion acts as the personal bodyguard for Franz when the Emperor takes to the field, always ensuring that he puts himself between Karl and any attack that threatens his majesty. Despite having these many roles, Ludwig has accomplished some truly inspiring feats. He's been present at massive battles against the Beastmen, dueling Doom Bulls one-on-one and coming out on top. This is the man who, when Marius Leitdorf died, Franz sent him down to Averland to deal with the secession of finding a new elector count, and he was able to accomplish that task despite being set upon and manipulated and nearly killed by a chaos cult who sought to take over Averland and plunge all of the Southern Empire into chaos, potentially leading up to an assassination plot of the Emperor himself. He is a man who comes out on top despite his age and despite everything that he's faced across his long life, and there is no one more loyal to the Emperor, who is also very cool-headed and an excellent diplomat. That should be enough for his lore, for everyone to kind of get an idea and to understand his character. Although he is surprisingly old, he doesn't have a massive amount of lore, but he does have some novels in Black Library that you can check out that have some excellent details and really long featured stories on them. In any event, I do think that adding him to the game would be a huge plus, because it would give all of us in the community, and especially the modders, a really sexy banner with just a full heroic flag flapping in the wind that I think everyone, myself included, would just kill for. So please God. Anyway, moving on, when it comes to acquiring Ludwig Schwartzel, I would say that for Karl Franz specifically, he should just start with him unlocked immediately at the start of the campaign, just like how Gorok starts with Lord Kroak at the start of his campaign. For the other factions, The best thing I could think of outside a quest situation would perhaps be something like once your Imperial Authority score becomes positive, so you start at -1, I believe. If you got it to, say, 0 or maybe a 1, you unlock Ludwig Schwartzel at that point for your faction. Or it could be instead, maybe once you compile 1,000 prestige points, you're able to get them. Something along those lines should be fine. For abilities and skills, obviously Schwarzhelm should entirely revolve around being a support character with decent duelist traits. At base, he should have the duelist keyword similar to characters like Sigvald, and of course come with the Guardian passive built in. He is an incredibly well-armored character, able to be taken on foot or horseback, which gives some good options for mobility versus cost. For unique abilities, Ludwig would rely primarily on his 2 items, the first of which we'll be looking at is the Sword of Justice. Despite the name, this blade is all about the murdery kind of justice, not the Batman kind of justice, and thus heavily augments Ludwig's ability to slay his opponents in close combat. This should grant him an active buff that grants Schwarzhelm with a solid increase of weapon damage and either melee attack or anti-infantry. You could kind of interpret it in different ways because it was meant for him to... It's kind of his ace in the hole when he does judicial trials. Meanwhile, the Emperor's Standard is Ludwig's true claim to fame and should be quite the powerful ability. That's his banner, obviously. I would either say the Emperor's Standard should either be a passive that doubles Ludwig's Encourage aura and provides a small boost to his leadership aura, or it should be an active buff that when used doubles his Encourage aura and grants a huge bonus to his leadership aura's effect. Beyond, just to make those troops really hold the line when that banner is active or nearby. Beyond that, the only noteworthy unique skill or ability I could see being made would be a late campaign skill called the Emperor's Bodyguard. This could perhaps do something like increasing the defensive stats of a nearby lord or hero, but maybe it also lowers Ludwig's by the same amount as he goes all in to protect his charge. Or it could just be like a flat buff to lords and heroes in his army as he, worries about protecting them. I don't know. Obviously you don't want to make it too much because he's already going to have guardians, so you don't want to stack a crazy amount of stuff on top of that. The main weaknesses for Ludwig are that ultimately he's almost entirely a support character that has a little bit of punch, but only under the correct circumstances. I imagine he would likely have pretty low armor piercing damage and would struggle at killing hardcore melee tanks, whether it's elite armored units or characters. In addition, he would be a character with a very limited amount of flexibility on the battlefield, as his use would entirely revolve around guarding other characters while trying to be in a good enough position to really milk those big leadership buffs. So you would have to be very particular and careful with his positioning. You can't just kind of let him go wherever he wants, or else you're not really going to get your value. For campaign, I would expect Ludwig to have a powerful set of buffs when it comes to diplomacy. At the very least, he should have skills to grant like solid at least +10 bonuses with all human factions. Kislev, Bretonnia, the works. Beyond that, I would expect his personal skill tree to revolve mostly around providing various buffs to the lord whose army he is in, and being extremely skilled at using the assassination agent action to represent his judicial challenges. Obviously, he should probably have a very notable set skill, maybe with multiple tiers, that allows him to reduce the success chance of enemy heroes attempting agent actions on the army he's joined, and maybe also increasing, the chance that any character who attempts an action on his army will be wounded in the attempt. If it was possible, I would also really like Ludwig to have a skill that allows him to just generate a flat amount of prestige every turn. Maybe like somewhere between 10 or 50 per turn with multiple tiers. So maybe the first skill point you put in, he generates 10 prestige per turn, and the second one is 30, and the last one's 50, for instance. Finally, I believe Schwarzhelm should increase the campaign movement for whatever army he joins and improve public order faction-wide, or at least grant massive public order buffs to the province that he's in. Either one of those is fine. For his appearance, Simply use this man's plethora of artwork and of course his tabletop model. The banner, that needs to be worth paying for. If this guy was ever in a Heroes of Legend DLC, I really feel strongly at least 45 to 50% of the budget should be this man's banner. Because it would really open the door for a lot of important things in the game. Moving away from Ludwig, the other contender for this role is, of course, the Prophet of Sigmar, the pious wanderer named Luther Huss. Little is known about his full history, as the warrior priest rarely speaks on the subject. As a child, he simply appeared one day at the door to a Sigmarite monastery near Weisenberg, wishing to learn how to battle the forces of chaos. He was taken in by the church and proved to be borderline fanatical in both his studies and training. Despite having quite the promising future laid out for him due to his uncompromising faith and incredible skills as a warrior, it wasn't enough for Luther to simply be in his sect. He wanted nothing more than to slay the minions of chaos. So he left the monastery and began to wander the empire, seeking out the corrupt and impure. This would lead to one of his most famous escapades, in which he led the defense of a small town named Weismand alongside its villagers. When the beastmen who had attacked earlier returned in force to finish their brutal slaughter, they found themselves faced with a frail collection of simple townsfolk led by one potentially dangerous foe. The battle was a complete massacre, but it was the children of chaos who found themselves on the receiving end of bloody ruin. Empowered by his faith in Sigmar, Luther Huss channeled the might of the warrior god, and each swing of his glowing hammer brought gory ruin to his foes. His prayers caused beastmen to burst into flame, and blades were turned aside by the supernatural aura that shrouded him. Faced with such an imposing foe, the mutant horde fled the battle, but were pursued by the priest. The villagers of Weismand feared him slain on his suicidal quest, but 3 days later he returned, covered in the blood of his enemies and bearing the decapitated head of the Brayherd shaman. He would go on to accomplish many other such incredible feats, earning him a seat on the Sigmarite Council in Altdorf, alongside the cult's highest-ranking members. It was here that he became keenly aware of how corrupt many of the priesthood had become, far more interested in politics and accruing wealth and power instead of seeking the destruction of chaos. Finally, able to take no more, Luther Huss stood at the altar of the Grand Cathedral of Sigmar and publicly denounced the squabbling priests for their greed and corruption. Enraged by these accusations, his superiors demanded him to recant and apologize, but instead, Luther simply collected his hammer and hymnal and left the capital. Huss exiled himself from ever visiting the decadent cathedrals that clearly represented the greed of those abusing Sigmar's faithful. The battlefield would be where he offered up his prayers, and from that day forward, he has wandered to preach the word of his God and warn against the corruption infiltrating the faith. Luther became the nightmare of the corrupt and greedy, as those powerful and wealthy members of the Sigmarite faith in Altdorf who cared only for furthering their own ambitions suddenly were found brutally murdered. It turned out that these same members were suspected of harboring or working with chaos cults, though of course there was no hard evidence. The Archlectors demanded that Luther Huss be excommunicated for his implied involvement in these brutal executions of justice, but Grand Theogenes Volkmar the Grim has always refused. It is noted that Volkmar always has an enigmatic smirk on his face whenever the rogue warrior priest is mentioned in his presence, as if the Grand Theogenes knows something about the Prophet of Sigmar's destiny that he will not or cannot say. There's the lore checked off, so let's move on to how one might acquire the legendary warrior priest. I think the best way to have Luther Huss appear would either be to defeat a chaos race in a battle, so like defeat Beastmen or Warriors of Chaos or Norska in a fight, Or perhaps just a short quest line to defend a village against some beastmen. Or maybe a short quest line where you take out a corrupt leader in the Sigmarite church and you have to fight some like Imperial rebels or whatever. I do think he could add some really good flavor to Volkmar's campaign, though, if he started out unlocked for the Grand Theogenist, as they do have a good relationship. For unique abilities and skills, the obvious big features that Huss would bring to the table would be his Chosen of Sigmar skill and unique prayer. Starting with his incredible personal buff, he has the Chosen of Sigmar, which in battle should be an active skill that when used, grants Luther a big increase to his melee attack, melee defense, weapon strength, and armor. Traditionally, this was designed to be an incredibly powerful ability to the point of being one use only, but we kind of saw with Belegar's Vengeance Incarnate ability that it's probably reasonable to have it be multi-use, but recharge off cooldown only in combat, or something along those lines. Then of course there's his unique prayer, known as Unbending Righteousness. This should be a notable buff to the leadership of all nearby allies. Just like our good buddy Ludwig Schwartzel, Luther can either run around on foot or upgrade up all the way to a barded warhorse. Beyond that, he's just kind of a coked up warrior priest when it comes to warfare. Perhaps should have a slightly higher base melee attack than the generic priest. For weaknesses, the main ones for Luther Huss are that ultimately he relies on his Chosen of Sigmar skill to really pump out massive damage numbers against medium to high tier enemies. Granted, he is a really solid support character due to having 4 different prayers, but of course he'll be in danger against powerful monsters or character killers if isolated. Then, of course, being an armored warrior priest equates to his movement not being terribly great if he suddenly needs to reposition or flee, but overall a fairly balanced character with a fun oh shit button to slam that if timed correctly can shift the outcome of a battle. On the campaign map, Luther Huss should probably just be a simple warrior priest hero who's got some special flair. Having all their abilities and skills, but bringing in his own seasoning with his unique prayer and the Chosen of Sigmar skill. In campaign, when unlocked, the Chosen of Sigmar should also grant him a substantial permanent ward save just like it does in tabletop. But that'll probably be too powerful for multiplayer, so I would just have it be a passive you get once you unlock that skill. I'd also suggest granting him a unique skill called Fiery Demagogue, which should just reduce the cooldown of all of Luther Huss's prayers to really let him preach the word of Sigmar while kicking ass. So although a rather straightforward character, he would be quite effective. For appearance, just refer to his official artwork and model. Huss is of course an incredibly important character, and when he was originally designed for the End of Days, the warrior priest would go on to influence the tide of the final war. So there is actually a decent amount of amazing art of the man from both versions of the End Times, and of course, you know, his stuff in the Empire Army book and his personal model. That marks the end of the Empire section, and I'm curious to know if you think my picks were wise. Do you agree with them, or would you have preferred the likes of Theodore Bruckner or some other champion? Be sure to let me know in the comment section below who of these two you would pick, and if you had to choose your own instead, would you go with one of these guys, or do you have someone else in mind? I will just kind of go ahead and cut the chase, though, and let you know that personally, I would kill for Ludwig Schwartzel. I think Huss also kind of works as a hero better than he does a lord, just because as a lord, I feel like him and Volkmar would basically be the same thing. But just give me the banner. Give me the banner! Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you next time. I believe next up is, greenskins. Anyway, hope you all have a nice day. Bye.